Does the Bible give examples of corrupt religious leaders? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thanks for listening, and thank you for joining us. And just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. Well, on today's program, Dr. Schnittger talks about his brand new book entitled Corruption in Christian Leadership. The book is subtitled An Expose and Analysis of Corruption in the Leadership of American Churches and Christian Organizations. This book shines the spotlight on people who profane the Lord's work and afflict the Lord's people. While they're not in the majority within evangelicalism, they are far too many, and they exert far too much influence. This book deals with biblical examples of corrupt leaders, as well as the findings of sociological studies regarding Christian leadership. The purpose of this book is to help you identify and respond wisely to corrupt leadership that may exist in your church or Christian organization. Also, if you've been harmed by such leaders in the past, this book will aid your discernment and healing. Let's join Dr. Schnittger as he discusses corruption in Christian leadership.
Thank you, Dane, and welcome, friends, to another Last Days Beacon podcast. I am gratified by the increasing number of people who view our weekly podcasts. We provide these free of charge to help equip you as an end-time saint. Today we continue a series of broadcasts that deal with content in my brand new book entitled Corruption in Christian Leadership. The book is subtitled An Expose and Analysis of Corruption in the Leadership of American Churches and Christian Organizations. This book is based on my over 40 years in full-time vocational service in Christian ministry, both in the pastorate and in parachurch ministry. This is a book that I did not want to write, but felt compelled to do so. It contains information that I was never taught in Bible college or seminary, but information I wish I had been taught. I'm sharing it to help those who are either in Christian service as an employee of the church or a Christian organization. It is also written to church-going Christians, because there will probably come a time when you will be exposed to corrupt leadership in your church. And this book will help you to understand the kind of person you're dealing with and how to deal with them. In these podcasts, I'm going to answer several questions dealing with the unpleasant but necessary topic of corruption in Christian leadership. On today's broadcast, I'm going to deal with these two questions. Number one, are there biblical examples of corrupt religious leaders? And number two, are there psychological categories that these people fit into? The first question, are there biblical examples of corrupt religious leaders? And the answer to that is an emphatic yes. In fact, there are so many examples that I would have to write a separate book just to deal with them. But I've chosen in this book to deal with three examples of corrupt religious leaders, all in the Old Testament. Let me begin by saying that corruption among those in places of religious authority is nothing new. We find some prominent examples in Scripture of those in authority over God's people, misusing their position for power and privilege. So this question will deal with the corruption of King Saul in the realm of theocratic government, as well as religious corruption as seen in the lives of Levitical priests, Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli. We begin with King Saul. King Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. He was the first king of Israel during their united kingdom. You may recall, friends, that when Samuel, the last of the judges, became old, the people demanded a king that they might be like the nations around them. 1 Samuel chapter 8. In consenting to the people's worldly requests, God provided the Israelites with exactly the kind of king they desired. And though Saul was a man of great ability as an administrator and a warrior, he acted not in the power and wisdom of the Lord, but in dependence on his own judgment and strength. This led to eventual disaster for himself and his family. Saul's first great failure was that of usurping the priestly office by offering a sacrifice on the altar at Gilgal. That's recorded in 1 Samuel 13. His second failure was outright disobedience by sparing King Agag and the best of the animals, 1 Samuel chapter 15. However, it was Saul's actions toward his anointed successor, David, that most fully demonstrates Saul's increasing corruption. After David's victory over Goliath and his subsequent victories over the Philistines, David's popularity among the Israelites began to eclipse that of Saul. Saul reacts first with jealousy, then with rage and violence. This behavior is attributed to an evil spirit from God that had come upon Saul, 1 Samuel 18, verse 10. Some Bible commentators speculate that Saul actually became mentally ill because of his irrational attitudes and behavior toward David, who had nothing but love and loyalty toward King Saul. Saul's corruption resulted in his son-in-law David having to flee the kingdom and run for his life for 7 years. The final straw in Saul's rebellion against God was when he consulted the witch of Endor for some word of hope in his approaching battle with the Philistines. Instead, God allowed what appears to be the spirit of Samuel to return to deliver one final message of condemnation to rebellious Saul. The message was, "Tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me." 1 Samuel 28, verse 19. The next day, Saul met the Philistines on the slopes of Mount Gilboa, and there he and his sons died. In Saul, we see abuse of power toward David, which began with jealousy, then progressed to rage, violence, and eventually maniacal behavior, leading to his destruction. Let's now turn our attention to corruption in religious leadership, as demonstrated in the lives of Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli. These men were Levitical priests who served in the tabernacle located in Shiloh. It was to this location that Hannah and her husband Elkanah came to worship and pray for a son. After God answered their prayer, she presented her son Samuel to Eli to minister in the house of God at Shiloh. 1 Samuel 2, verse 11. The narrative then shifts to Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. The text immediately identifies their spiritual lineage. 1 Samuel 2, verse 12 says, "Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord." The term Belial was a Hebrew epithet meaning good for nothing or evil. So Eli had 2 good-for-nothing sons who were serving in the priesthood. Let's see how these good-for-nothing, evil sons conducted themselves in the ministry. In the first place, they stole by force sacrifices that were being offered to the Lord. Now the priests at the tabernacle were entitled to receive the breast and right thigh of the animal being sacrificed, according to Leviticus, but only after the fat had been burned on the altar. Eli's sons, in their willful wickedness, ignored both requirements. Second, they had sex with women that came to the tabernacle to worship. We read in 1 Samuel 2, verse 22, "Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and that they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation." As a result of their corruption in the ministry, the Lord pronounced their doom in 1 Samuel 2, verse 25. "If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them." The Lord here enunciated a most important principle, applicable in every age. Sins against God and His Word are more grievous and dangerous than sins against other people. The family of Eli was about to discover just how dangerous their sins really were. The Lord made good His promised judgment when the Philistines slaughtered over 30,000 Israeli soldiers in the battle at Shiloh, 1 Samuel chapter 4. The Philistines then proceeded to slay both Hophni and Phinehas, and also took the Ark of the Covenant. When Eli heard the dreadful news, he fell backwards, broke his neck, and died, 1 Samuel 4:18. To top it all off, the widow of Phinehas went into labor upon hearing the devastating news, and she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory is departed from Israel," because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband, 1 Samuel 4:21. God brought devastating judgment on the house of Eli, and indeed upon all of Israel, because of the corruption of Hophni and Phinehas. This demonstrates that God will not allow the abuse of religious leadership to continue forever. It will be met with severe consequences from the Lord, because God always has the last word. So we see from these two examples, one of a civil leader and the other of religious leaders, that the potential to misuse leadership over God's people abounds, and that the results are devastating both to those in leadership and those we lead. The next question is, are there psychological categories that these people fit into? First, let's analyze the corrupt attitudes of King Saul. The first attitude that Saul exhibited is this, that everything people do is in relationship to me. In other words, Saul had what I call a meocentric view of the universe, as opposed to a theocentric or God-centered view of the universe. In other words, to Saul, the universe revolves around me, and everything that people around me do must have some relationship to their attitude toward me. We see this in Saul's response to David's increasing popularity, as we read in 1 Samuel 18 and verse 7. "And the women answered one another as they played, and they said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward." Associated with this meocentric view of the universe is the attitude that everyone owes me unqualified loyalty and obedience. Because these women acknowledged David's exploits as being greater than Saul's, in Saul's mind, these women were guilty of disloyalty. By implication, David was disloyal as well. We all know that this perception was untrue because David was extremely loyal to Saul. However, Saul had begun to make a break with reality, as we will see in the following verses. The third and resultant attitude and behavior that flows from this meocentric view of the universe is this: if I perceive that you are not totally and unquestioningly loyal to me, you will be punished. This was seen almost immediately in Saul's subsequent treatment of David, as recorded in 1 Samuel 18, verses 10 and 11. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his harp, hand at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. We know from subsequent events described in 1 Samuel that Saul's behavior became increasingly maniacal, leading to his eventual destruction as well as that of his sons. Saul's meocentric view of the universe eventually resulted in the Lord sending an evil spirit upon him, which led to progressively more irrational and destructive behavior, leading to the eventual destruction of both himself and his entire family. Well, let's shift gears now and look at the corrupt attitudes and conduct of Hophni and Phinehas, the Levitical priests who served at the tabernacle in Shiloh during the time of the judges. You will recall that their misconduct was twofold. First, they stole by force sacrifices that were being offered to the Lord. Secondly, they had sex with the women who came to the tabernacle for worship. Their basic attitude toward the ministry was this: this ministry belongs to me. I can use the people and the resources associated with my ministry any way I please. It is obvious by the severe judgments that followed, both on the Israelites, then on Hophni and Phinehas and their permissive father Eli, that God abhors this kind of attitude toward ministry. If we were to express these attitudes in psychological terms, in my view, Saul was primarily a sociopath, and Hophni and Phinehas were primarily narcissists. All three had characteristics that could lead one to conclude that they exhibited characteristics that were both sociopathic and narcissistic, as human behaviors tend not to fall or fit into neat little categories. These conditions do share some similarities, but also some differences. So let me define these terms before we proceed. I'm quoting from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, commonly known as the DSM-5, for a brief description of each. Both narcissism and sociopathy are clustered in the DSM-5 as personality disorders. Some of the characteristics of a sociopath, which is clinically known as antisocial personality disorder, are these: a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults, reckless disregard for the safety of self or others, lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. I believe that that is descriptive of King Saul, the sociopath. Well, let's describe Hophni and Phinehas, the narcissists. Some of the characteristics of a person with narcissistic personality disorder are these: a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, a need for admiration, and lack of empathy, has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should only associate with other special or high-status people, requires excessive admiration, has a sense of entitlement, is interpersonally exploitive. In other words, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own needs, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. In my view, Hophni and Phinehas were narcissists. Well, friends, I think we've reached a good stopping point for today. On the next podcast, I will continue to answer questions regarding corruption in Christian leadership. I hope you will join me. And now our announcer, Dane Rome, will share how you may obtain a copy of my latest book.
Thank you, Dr. Schnittger. Today, we're offering a brand new book by Dr. Schnittger entitled Corruption in Christian Leadership. The 70-page book is full of information that will help you identify and respond wisely to corrupt leadership that may exist in your church or Christian organization. Also, if you've been harmed by such leaders in the past, this book will aid your discernment and healing. You may order this book by going to our website, www.swpm.us, and typing Corruption in Christian Leadership in the bookstore link. This book is available for a gift of $4.99 plus shipping. The website address again is www.swpm.us, and the name of the book is Corruption in Christian Leadership, available for your offering of $4.99 plus shipping. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for today's podcast. We look forward to seeing you next week for another Last Days Beacon program brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Until then, this is your announcer, Dane Rome. Thanks for listening.